All right, so today we're really diving into something I find fascinating, Indian dairy.
Okay.
We're going to unpack some recent research on how this industry is just like exploding, but also hitting some, unexpected roadblocks.
Right.
Get ready to think about milk production on a whole other level because our deep dive today is focused on India,
Okay.
the world's largest milk producer.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. And it's not just about how much milk they're putting out, but the sheer speed of this whole transformation.
Right.
I mean, in just a few decades, they've gone from making 17 million tons of milk back in 1951 to a massive 112 million tons in 2010.
Wow.
They're really changing the whole global dairy scene.
Those numbers are honestly kind of mind-blowing. So,
Yeah.
how did they pull off such a massive increase in production? Are we
Yeah.
talking about, some super high-tech, futuristic milk here, or what?
Well, not exactly futuristic, but
Right.
definitely a mix of things.
Okay.
One big factor has been a real focus on improving their breeding programs
Yeah.
and management practices, how they're actually raising the cows.
Yeah, that makes sense. Like, healthier, well-cared-for cows mean more milk, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
But something I was curious about, I read that even with this huge increase in, total production, the amount of milk each cow produces in India is still lower than other big players in Asia, like Japan and Korea.
Hmm.
Why is there that gap?
That's a really good question. A lot of it boils down to how Indian dairy farming is actually structured.
Okay.
So unlike those massive tech-heavy farms you see in some other developed countries, India's dairy sector is mostly made up of these smallholder farmers.
Okay.
These farmers often have limited land, resources, and they rely a lot on those traditional practices passed down, through generations.
Right.
They face a really unique set of challenges.
It's like comparing a family-run bakery to a giant factory.
Exactly.
They both make bread, but the methods, the whole scale, it's totally different. So naturally they have different levels of efficiency.
Exactly. And that difference in scale and resources, it plays a huge role in the challenges the Indian dairy industry is facing.
Okay, so let's get into those challenges.
Sure.
What are some of the biggest hurdles for India's dairy industry?
So one major hurdle is the genetic potential of their indigenous cow breeds.
Hmm.
So while these native breeds are really resilient, like they're adapted to the Indian climate, they don't naturally produce as much milk as some breeds you find in, say, Western countries, like Holsteins.
Right, so it's a trade-off, hardiness versus high yield.
Exactly.
I've heard about cross-breeding programs to try and tackle this.
Yeah, you're right. Crossbreeding is one approach they're exploring.
Okay.
The idea is to bring in genes from those higher yielding breeds to boost overall milk production.
Makes sense.
And it's a big but, it's not without its critics.
Right, there's always another side.
Exactly. Some people argue that crossbreeding can dilute valuable traits in those indigenous breeds, potentially making them more vulnerable to diseases or less suited to local conditions.
So it's about finding the right balance.
Exactly.
But even beyond breeding, just thinking about feeding such a huge population of cows,
Right.
that's got to be a logistical challenge, right?
Absolutely.
How do they make sure all those cows are well-fed and productive?
It's another major bottleneck. India constantly struggles to secure enough feed for its massive cattle population.
Yeah, I bet.
And shrinking land availability just adds to that pressure.
Right, of course.
Imagine the competition for resources between feeding livestock and growing actual food crops for people.
Yeah.
And then add in the constant need for sustainable, environmentally friendly solutions on top of that.
Right.
It's a puzzle, to say the least.
Sounds like trying to fit a square peg in a round hole.
Yeah.
Trying to juggle all those competing demands must be like a never-ending game of Tetris.
It really is. And then on top of all that, there's the logistical nightmare of getting all that milk from these small, often remote farms to the processing plants.
Oh, right.
Especially in a country where the infrastructure for keeping things cold, the cold chain, is still developing.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that. Keeping the milk fresh and safe in those temperatures without a reliable cold chain.
It's incredibly difficult.
Yeah.
And it throws another wrench in the works. Adulteration and food safety concerns.
Right.
Without consistent quality control, keeping the milk safe and untampered with becomes a real challenge.
Of course.
And that impacts everything: domestic consumers,
Yeah.
access to safe milk, even potentially harming the reputation of their export market.
Yeah, it all ties together. It really shows you how connected everything is, huh?
Yeah.
Like even something as simple as a glass of milk has this whole complex journey from, the farm to our fridge.
Absolutely.
But let's shift gears a bit here.
Okay.
We've talked about the challenges, but what about the potential?
Right.
India's dairy industry is obviously a major force.
It is.
What does the future hold for them?
Yeah.
Could they be on track to becoming the ultimate leader in the global dairy aisle?
Well, it's definitely possible. The potential for growth is huge,
Right.
but a lot hinges on whether they can overcome these hurdles we've been talking about.
Okay, so let's dive into that potential then.
Sure.
What's working in India's favor?
Right.
What are the potential upsides for them in this market?
Well, first off, India has a massive population, and it's growing, and they have this increasing demand for milk and all sorts of dairy products.
Right.
Some projections actually estimate that their domestic demand for milk alone could double by as soon as 2020.
Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah.
So just meeting that demand alone would be a huge economic boost.
It absolutely would be. Yeah, no question. And it's not just about meeting that demand at home either.
Right.
India also has big ambitions to become a major exporter of dairy products, really competing with those big players like the EU and the US.
That's a big leap, going from these local farms to competing on a global scale.
It is.
What kind of impact could that have on a more local level?
Right.
Especially for those smallholder farmers dealing with all those challenges we talked about.
Well, it could be really transformative for them.
Yeah.
Increased demand, both domestically and from those international markets, could mean higher incomes.
Yeah.
It could mean better livelihoods, more economic opportunities overall for, honestly, millions of rural households.
Yeah.
And we can't forget, dairy farming is essential for a huge part of the Indian population.
Right. It's about more than just numbers. It's about empowering people, right?
Absolutely.
Strengthening communities. Now, I have to ask about something I've heard mentioned before, the AMUL model.
Okay.
How does that fit into all of this?
Right.
And what makes it so unique?
AMUL, it's more than just a model. It's a real success story.
Okay.
It's India's largest dairy cooperative. And a perfect example of how something homegrown can completely revolutionize an entire industry.
Okay. I'm definitely interested.
Yeah.
Break it down for me. What is it about this cooperative model that makes it so effective?
Well, it's about collective power, essentially.
Okay.
Imagine thousands of small-scale dairy farmers all coming together,
Okay.
pooling their resources, their knowledge, sharing in the profits together.
Right.
That's the foundation of a cooperative.
Okay.
It gives those farmers a much stronger voice, more bargaining power,
Yeah, that makes sense.
and access to better resources, technology, things they wouldn't have on their own.
So it's a united we stand, divided we fall kind of thing.
Exactly. The AMUL model, it hasn't just empowered tons of farmers, it's also played a key role in India's journey to becoming this dairy powerhouse.
Okay.
It's a great example of how a grassroots approach can create something more equitable and, importantly, more sustainable.
This is all fascinating.
Yeah.
It really paints a picture of how complex the industry really is.
It is.
But it makes me think, with all this talk about, growth and expansion, how do we make sure it's done sustainably?
Right.
There's got to be a way to increase that milk production, but also be mindful of, the environment.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
That's the big question, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's a real balancing act.
Okay.
You have this amazing opportunity for economic growth, bettering people's lives, but then you have to think about the potential impact on, well, everything. Resources, how land is being used, and of course, greenhouse gas emissions.
So what's the answer?
Right.
Is there a way to find that balance, to get more milk without hurting the planet?
There's no easy answer, that's for sure.
Yeah.
It's going to take a multifaceted approach. Investing in more efficient farming practices that are better for the environment,
Okay.
researching different feed sources, figuring out how to minimize waste,
Right.
and of course promoting better land management techniques.
So it's about taking that holistic view, kind of like we talked about earlier, finding that balance between those native breeds and the higher yielding ones.
Exactly.
Okay.
It's about finding solutions that work on all these different levels.
Right.
Thinking long term.
Yeah.
What kind of impact are our choices having, not just today, but for future generations?
It's about thinking beyond just the immediate gains and really looking at the bigger picture, right?
Yeah.
And that's not just a challenge for India. This is everyone. Right?
Absolutely. We're all part of this global food system, you know.
All right.
Every single one of us has a role to play in making it more sustainable for everyone.
Well, that's definitely something to think about. This has been a really, really eye-opening look into, the world of Indian dairy.
Yeah,
It's clear there are some big hurdles, right?
definitely.
But also some huge opportunities for growth and for innovation.
Absolutely. It's been a great conversation.
Yeah.
From those small, like, family farms
Yeah.
to, this potential of becoming a major player on the world stage.
Right.
The Indian dairy industry, it's a force to be reckoned with. It really shows you how interconnected everything is
Mhm.
and how something as basic as a glass of milk can have such a complex, far-reaching story.
It really does. And as we wrap up this episode, we'll leave you with this the next time you're enjoying some, delicious dairy. Take a minute to think about the journey it took to get to you.
Right.
The farmers, the cows, those challenges, the opportunities. It's a story that's still being written.